On the 5th of October 1975, 11-year-old Lesley Molseed was asked by her mother to nip to the shop for some bread and air freshener. She would never return. 3 days later, her body was found, murdered and sexually assaulted. She had died a horrific death. The police had a suspect and just had to make the evidence fit. Sadly for that suspect, Stefan Kisko, he was innocent. The police made evidence fit and he was wrongly imprisoned for 16 years. This is the story of how Stefan was framed for murder by the Yorkshire police and how Ronald Castree, a man I knew, was eventually caught and jailed for this horrific crime. Lesley was a very slight girl, 11 years old, but looked a lot younger, 5, 6, maybe 7 years of age. She had a congenital heart condition, which meant open heart surgery at a young age, and it also meant her growth and development was stunted, so she looked a lot younger than she actually was, and she was very fragile. So she didn't always play with the local kids, doing all the boisterous things young kids do. She would stay at home while the other kids played out. This made her very lonely, but it didn't stop her being full of personality. On the occasions when she did go out, she would talk to anyone and anyone. On the 5th of October 1975, Lesley's mum was making sandwiches for the family, but realised she was low on bread. She had a rota for the children when it came to chores, and it was Lesley's turn to go to the shop and buy some bread. She was sent with £1 and off she went. After half an hour to an hour, it was noted that she hadn't come back. The family were concerned, but assumed she'd be somewhere local chatting away to somebody. So a small search was done. They didn't find her. It was 3 days later, on the 8th of October, she was found on an embankment 9 metres above a remote lay-by on Rishworth Moor. She'd been stabbed brutally 12 times in the back. Her clothing was intact, but semen was found on the knickers and her dress. Whilst the police were searching for Lesley, 4 girls aged 12 to 18 had alleged that young tax clerk Stefan Kisko had exposed his penis to them and ran off. The police pulled Kisko in for questioning and decided this was their man. They just had to make the evidence fit. In Kisko's car they found pornography and sweets. In isolation, you can see how suspicious this looks. But Kisko had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. His hormones were up the wall, so much so that he'd been in hospital for testosterone injections only a few weeks before. They also found a book in his car of registrations that he'd noted down of people that had annoyed him. This led the police to believe that he was an odd character, and the evidence was stacking up. Acting upon the teenage girls' information and their suspicions of Kisko's strange lifestyle, they arrested him on the 21st of December 1975. During questioning, the interviewing detective seized upon every apparent inconsistency between his varying accounts of the relevant days. As further demonstration of his likely guilt, Kisko confessed to the crime after 3 days of intensive questioning. He believed that by doing so, he would be allowed to go home and that the ensuing investigation would prove him innocent and his confession false. Prior to the Police and Criminal Investigation Act of 1984, suspects did not have the right to have a solicitor present during interviews, and the police did not ask Kisko if he wanted a solicitor. His request to have his mother present while he was being questioned was refused, and crucially, the police did not caution him until long after they decided that he was the prime and only suspect. After admitting to the murder, he was arrested and charged on Christmas Eve 1975. He then went to Armley Prison, now known as Leeds Prison, after being charged. He was nicknamed Oliver Laurel because he had the girth of Oliver Hardy and the perplexed air of Oliver's comedy sidekick Stan Laurel. Later, in the presence of his solicitor, he retracted his confession, but it was too late and he was charged and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Lesley Molseed. Stefan's trial was a complete mess. His defence team was led by David Waddington QC, who made many significant mistakes. Firstly, he did not seek an adjournment when the Crown delivered thousands of pages of additional unused material on the first morning of the trial. Then there was their inconsistent defence of diminished responsibility that Stefan never authorised, on the grounds that the testosterone he was receiving for his hypogonadism might have made him behave unusually. Stefan's endocrinologist strongly disagreed with this theory. If called to testify, would have said that this treatment could not have caused him to act in such a way that would carry out a murder. He was never, ever called. The manslaughter claim totally undermines Stefan's claims that he was totally innocent and destroyed his alibis. In fact, his innocence could have been demonstrated at the time of the trial. The pathologist who examined Lesley's clothes found traces of sperm, whereas the sample taken from Kisko by the police contained no sperm. There was medical evidence that Kisko had broken his ankle some months before. And in view of that, with him being overweight, he would have found it very difficult to scale a slope to the murder spot. The sperm findings were suppressed by the police and never disclosed to the defence team or the jury. Neither was the medical evidence of his broken ankle disclosed to the court. Stefan was given a life sentence, and the judge led praise to the girls who accused him of exposure, thanking them for their bravery and honesty. In prison, he was labelled a sex offender and had a very hard time. He was constantly attacked and was eventually moved to solitary confinement to protect him. Here, his mental health suffered. He developed schizophrenia, started getting delusions. He thought there was a big conspiracy against him to put an innocent tax clerk in jail and experiment on him. This led to any appeal or any claim of innocence being knocked back as a paranoid delusion. His health just got worse and worse, and he was eventually moved to Ashworth Hospital. Stefan's mother never gave up the fight though. She was forever protesting her son's innocence, but he was ignored and stonewalled by both politicians, including her local MP Cyril Smith and two Prime Ministers, James Callaghan and Margaret Thatcher. In 1984, Kisko's mother contacted Justice, a UK human rights organisation which at the time investigated many miscarriages of justice. 3 years later, she was put in touch with solicitor Campbell Malone, who agreed to take a look at the case. Malone contacted Philip Clegg, who had been a junior on the defence in the original 1976 trial. Clegg had expressed his own doubts about the confession and conviction at the time, and over the next 2 years Clegg and Malone prepared a petition to the Home Secretary. The draft was finally ready to be sent in October of 1989. On the same day, by coincidence, Waddington QC was appointed Home Secretary. 16 months passed before the investigation into the conduct of the original trial would begin. Waddington resigned as Home Secretary in November 1990 to take up a peerage, and to serve as leader of the House of Lords. He was replaced by Kenneth Baker. In February 1991, and with the help of a private detective named Peter Jackson, Malone finally urged the Home Office to reopen the case, which was referred back to the West Yorkshire Police. Detective Superintendent Trevor Wilkinson was assigned to the job. He immediately found several glaring errors. Stefan's innocence was demonstrated conclusively through medical evidence. He had male hypogonadism, which rendered him infertile, contradicting forensic evidence obtained at the time of the murder in 1975. His testes measured just 4 to 5 millimeters, whereas the average adult testicular size was 15 to 20 millimeters. During the research, Jackson found someone who confirmed that Stefan had been seen with his aunt tending to his father's grave the day the murder took place. They said they could not understand why they had not been called to give evidence at the trial. Someone else said that Stefan had been in the shop around the time of the murder too. Also that month, the girls who were commended for their honesty and bravery admitted they had made it all up, and that Stefan hadn't exposed himself. They had just seen a taxi driver taking a pay behind a bush, and to point the finger at Stefan would be a bit of a laugh. All the evidence was put before three justices, Lord Chief Justice Lane, Mr Justice Rose and Mr Justice Potts, and unanimously overturned the conviction. Stefan wasn't a free man though. 16 years in prison, the scars were deep, and he remained for some time in a hospital, and upon his release led a reclusive life, only popping to the shops with his mum from time to time. It wasn't long before he sadly passed away on the 5th of January 1994. 4 months later, his mum passed away too, leaving nobody alive to collect his paltry £500,000 compensation for the wrongful arrest. On the 5th of November 2006, it was announced that a 53-year-old man had been arrested in connection with the murder of Molseed that had taken place back in 1975. DNA was said to be a direct hit, meaning 53-year-old Ronald Castree had done it. No ifs, no buts, DNA directly linked him to the murder of Lesley Molseed. In 1976 he was fined £25 for abducting and sexually assaulting a 9-year-old girl, and in 1978 he was fined £50 for indecently assaulting a 7-year-old boy. This is where I have a tenuous link to the case. I knew Ronald Castree. He owned a local comic shop in my hometown, Ashton-under-Lyne. I purchased comics off him after school, at weekends. I was in and out the shop all the time, but my dad said something very telling. He said, "Be careful of him, it's Dirty Ron, he's a dangerous man." I knew him as the guy in the comic shop, not a dangerous man at all. It was obvious he had a temper, as he'd fly off the handle at anyone asking stupid questions, damaging property or stealing from the shop. He would go mental. But to me, aged 12, 13, 14, he was nice and kind. Never in a million years would he have thought he'd be capable of such crimes, even though all the local adults knew him as Dirty Ron. When he was arrested and convicted, nobody seemed that surprised. It was just Ron, it was who he was. He was a bit creepy, he was a bit weird, he was a very angry man, very sexually frustrated. He had a lot of blue humour in him. But to me, he just seemed mild-mannered. It makes you wonder, people knew him as Dirty Ron, but for what reason? He can be convicted of sexual assault twice on young children and not be put in prison. Fined £25 and £50. It's ridiculous. Well, did people know about this and were they very forgiving? Knew about his criminal past but didn't care? Or did they know of other victims? I guess we'll never know.